They call it asset synchronization and logistics management. I call it babysitting 3,000 tons of fast-moving steel, burning rubber, and exhausted human lives traveling at 70 miles per hour across the American asphalt. My name is Maxine. For more than 2 decades, I have been the unseen anchor keeping vanguard freight lines from drifting into total chaos. You have likely never heard my name, but if you purchased an appliance in Ohio, an orange in the dead of winter, or emergency supplies after a devastating storm, I am the sole reason those items arrived safely. My official title is Senior Contract Integration Supervisor. In reality, that is just corporate speak for the person who knows exactly where all the secrets are buried and keeps the keys to the graveyard hidden safely in her desk. I do not sit in a beautiful corner suite with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking a pristine city skyline. Instead, I occupy a modest workspace that constantly smells of stale gas station, coffee and overheated laser printers, tucked deep inside the windowless operational basement of our headquarters. To be honest, I prefer it down here away from the corporate politics. This quiet environment allows me to truly hear the rhythmic pulse of our entire distribution network. I can easily predict when a labor dispute at a major shipping port will completely disrupt a delivery schedule across the Midwest days before the union leaders even print out their picket signs. I know precisely which transport companies are falsifying their travel logs, and I know which individual drivers will willingly push through a hazardous blizzard simply because they owe me a personal favor from years ago. Let us establish one crucial fact before I explain how I completely dismantled a billion-dollar shipping empire with a single electronic document. I never wanted to be a savior or a villain, I just wanted to do my job without interference. The entire catastrophe began, as these corporate tragedies typically do, with a sudden retirement. The original founder, Old Man Garrison, did not pass away, but he decided to step down to spend his remaining years at a massive private vineyard in Europe that cost more than the annual budget of a small nation. He was an incredibly difficult man to deal with, but he deeply understood the volatile price of commercial diesel fuel. We shared mutual professional respect. I kept his thousands of trucks moving smoothly across the map, and he ensured my paychecks arrived on time every single week. Then came Vance Garrison. He was 32 years old, brandishing an expensive graduate business degree from a prominent university after his wealthy father funded a brand new sports complex just to get him accepted. His teeth were artificially bright, resembling small glowing monitors. He initially stepped into the executive office, wearing a tailored suit that cost significantly more than my entire vehicle, radiating an offensive combination of expensive cologne and completely unearned self-assurance. He could not distinguish a heavy shipping pallet from a standard storage box, yet he suddenly assumed total control of our entire operation. During his very first week, he installed a high-end cold brew tap in the employee lounge. By his second week, he terminated our dedicated internal custodial staff to hire an outside firm, causing the facility plumbing to fail completely within 48 hours. By the third month of his tenure, Vance was regularly touring the operations floor alongside a woman named Tiffany, who carried herself with immense unearned authority. She was introduced as our new director of corporate harmony and team synergy, though it was glaringly obvious she was just a personal connection brought onto the company payroll to justify an extravagant salary. I chose to keep my head down and remain focused on my daily tasks because I'm a true professional. I had successfully navigated 3 major economic downturns, a global health crisis, and a massive network cyber attack that required me to manually direct our fleet using physical paper maps and public payphones. I mistakenly believed I could easily tolerate Vance, but our core personalities were destined to clash. The friction between us was not immediate, but rather a slow grinding tension that felt like coarse sand destroying an engine. Vance visibly disliked my presence in the office because I represented the old ways of doing business. I was a traditionalist who preferred physical documentation and human conversation over digital applications, often choosing to call a contact directly to handle an emergency rather than sending an instant message. To him, I was an outdated relic of the past. To me, he was merely a fragile hood ornament on a heavy commercial truck. He looked incredibly polished and expensive, but he was ultimately useless when the company encountered a real crisis on the open road. The dynamic shifted completely on a hectic Tuesday afternoon. I was deep in intense negotiations over a massive contract renewal with the Regional Maritime Transport Union. Those port workers are notoriously tough individuals who manage heavy machinery and refuse to back down during intense business disputes. I had been conversing with their main representative, Big Marcus, for 4 consecutive hours, carefully restructuring a small rate adjustment into a long-term agreement that would keep our primary shipping corridors secure for the next 5 years. Vance suddenly strolled past my desk with Tiffany following closely behind like an accessory. Without stopping, he casually ordered me to clear off my desk because the clutter created a negative impression for visiting corporate investors. My workspace was completely covered in critical freight manifests, shipping schedules, and legal pads filled with my dense handwritten notes. This desk was the actual nerve center of our daily logistics operation. I covered the telephone receiver and firmly explained that I was finalizing the Maritime Union contract, warning him that if I stopped to organize my notes, we would lose our access to the southern ports. Vance stopped walking, turned around, and flashed the condescending smile people usually reserve for someone who is completely confused. He informed me that modern cloud software managed those contracts now, instructing me to eliminate the physical paper completely before walking away while Tiffany laughed quietly. Marcus was still waiting patiently on the open phone line and asked if everything was all right. I assured him the situation was under control. Despite feeling an intense desire for a cigarette to calm my nerves after quitting the habit a decade ago, I managed to finalize the agreement, securing $40 million in revenue for the firm over the consecutive quarter. I did not receive a single word of appreciation from management for my hard work. Instead, my inbox received an automated warning from Human Resources regarding the workspace cleanliness policy. The ultimate breaking point occurred in the middle of autumn when the busy shipping season was escalating rapidly. We were managing holiday merchandise, heavy grocery shipments, and consumer electronics simultaneously, which required me to log exhausting 12-hour days on pure determination. An internal email arrived with a subject line demanding mandatory attendance at an event celebrating visionary leadership. It was an elaborate invitation to Vance's birthday celebration at the family estate, scheduled for Saturday evening. The message stated that attendance was strictly required for all senior operational managers. That particular Saturday was the busiest day of our entire fiscal month, coinciding with massive international cargo arrivals at the western ports. I was personally responsible for monitoring the customs clearance of a multimillion-dollar pharmaceutical shipment that would spoil instantly if delayed. I viewed the digital invitation with its elaborate gold formatting and hit the reply button. I politely explained that I could not attend the celebration due to the critical temperature-sensitive nature of the incoming pharmaceutical cargo, which required my active live monitoring all evening. I wished him well and signed my name. I assumed that would be the end of the matter since my response was professional and logical. The following morning, the atmosphere inside the building was noticeably altered. The air felt heavy and tense, much like the drop in atmospheric pressure right before a major storm hits. The telephone lines were unusually silent, and coworkers were nervously glancing at my workspace. I sat down at my desk, activated my computer station, and took a small sip of my lukewarm coffee. My standard login attempt failed immediately with an access denied message on the screen. As I prepared to call the technology department, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps approaching my area. Vance arrived without his usual smile, flanked by Tiffany holding a clipboard and 2 uncomfortable security officers. I asked if the central network was experiencing an outage, even though my instincts told me exactly what was happening. Vance smoothed his expensive necktie and announced that the organization was moving toward an agile leadership structure, stating that my refusal to blend with the company culture was the final straw. He flatly told me I was not a team player, causing a heavy silence to stretch across the room. I calmly stated that he was terminating my employment simply because I chose to secure our cargo rather than watch him celebrate his birthday. Tiffany interrupted with a strained voice, claiming they needed employees who aligned with their corporate frequency. I looked at both of them and reminded Vance that I personally managed relationships with 3,000 individual vendors and held the legal signing authority for major transit alliances. I warned him that these critical business relationships would not simply transfer to a digital system. Vance laughed dismissively, stating that everyone was replaceable in modern business before demanding my physical access badge. I looked at my familiar desk filled with sticky notes and the small picture of my loyal dog. I stood up calmly without crying or causing a scene, retrieved the plastic security card from my pocket, and placed it directly into his hand. I told him good luck and grabbed my personal belongings before walking toward the exit. As the elevator doors closed on his arrogant expression, I checked the time and noted it was just past 9 in the morning. Within 15 minutes, our first major transport fleet would reach the checkpoint, and the entire organization was about to discover that its operational heart had been removed. I was the actual safety switch for the company, and they had just triggered me. The outside air felt damp and cool as I walked across the concrete parking lot toward my older SUV. I sat inside the vehicle listening to the steady rain hit the windshield, realizing that most people would panic about their financial future after losing a long-term position. A small part of me calculated the risks of being unemployed, but my decades of experience managing logistics emergencies immediately took over. This time, I was not resolving a crisis for the corporation. I was creating one. I retrieved my personal phone, which I always kept entirely separate from company networks, and opened my personal email account. I drafted a formal notice of representation change, explicitly stating that I was no longer employed by Vanguard Freight Lines and was no longer the authorized signatory for any active service agreements or compliance verifications. I referenced Clause 7B of our master contract, noting that my departure could trigger an immediate suspension of extended credit terms until a qualified replacement was vetted. I directed all urgent inquiries to Vance's corporate email and began sending the message to every single vendor alphabetically. Clause 7B was a specific security provision I had inserted years ago to appease nervous vendors when our credit was weak, granting them the legal right to halt services immediately if I ever left the organization. Vance was completely unaware of this specific clause because he never reviewed the actual legal documentation. I spent 20 minutes sending the notice to dozens of accounts, knowing that each message effectively froze a vital piece of our transit network. My phone quickly rang with a call from Marcus at the Maritime Union, who demanded to know why his system showed my corporate email was completely deleted. I explained that Vance had terminated my employment that morning due to a lack of cultural alignment. Marcus laughed loudly and asked if the new executive realized our latest contract renewal was not even fully processed yet. I told him Vance believed the automated software could manage the details. Marcus grumbled that software did not look out for his workers, asking who would authorize the hazardous chemical transport scheduled for that evening. I informed him that Vance or Tiffany would have to handle the paperwork, prompting Marcus to declare that he would not risk his personnel without my verification. He stated he was exercising Clause 7B immediately and stopping the fleet. I smiled as the first major domino fell, started my vehicle, and drove out of the lot. I passed several company trucks entering the terminal, completely unaware that their corporate fuel cards would be declined within the hour because our primary fuel vendor was about to read my message. I chose to set up my temporary command center at a classic roadside diner a few miles away, a familiar place where drivers often gathered for strong coffee. I opened my laptop on a table and watched my phone ring continuously with incoming calls from dispatch offices, customs brokers, and Vance himself. I ignored the calls completely, allowing the pressure to build back at headquarters. I monitored a public transit tracking map on my screen and watched as small red indicators began appearing across the country, signaling that our trucks were stopping in place. A massive cluster was forming near the main Midwest distribution center because the secure gate entry codes required a manual reset that I had intentionally left uncompleted. Vance likely had no idea the automated security system required human intervention to function. A text message arrived from an administrative colleague named Linda, who frantically explained that Vance was screaming in the corridor and accusing me of disabling the main server because he could not log into the vendor management system. I laughed quietly because I had not broken anything. The system simply required a two-factor verification code that was hard-coded to route directly to my personal device 5 years ago. I messaged her back stating that the verification code would expire in 60 seconds and wished them luck. The diner grew louder with the afternoon crowd, but I remained focused on the screen as another red indicator appeared near the eastern shipping docks. The entire logistics network was steadily freezing in place as vendors protected their own financial interests because their trusted point of contact was gone. My phone rang once more, and this time I answered to hear Tiffany's incredibly panicked and breathless voice through the speaker. She desperately ordered me to provide the administrative access codes because multiple drivers were stuck outside the locked terminal gates. I responded with total professional calm, informing her that I no longer possessed the access credentials before hanging up the phone.